Welcome to Garden Valley Church Podcasts. We are so looking forward to having you join us today.
It's going to get weird here, folks.
This is great. This is
and
the best.
he was eaten by worms and died. Now, well, welcome back to A Study in Acts.
Yep.
I'm Brian.
I'm Shelley.
Yep, that's who she is. And
And today we're wrapping up Acts chapter 12.
yes.
And we've, so a quick recap. Peter was arrested. James the apostle was beheaded by Herod. Peter was arrested. He was put in jail. A bunch of stuff happened. An angel came, got Peter out. He went and told the story of his release. The church had been praying. And so lo and behold, Pete's out. He decides he's had enough of this jail stuff. So he goes somewhere, disappears. Herod does a search, can't find him, kills 16 of his best soldiers. And so now we are going to fast forward a little bit. And what happened to Herod?
What happened to Herod, and what's the close of this story before we move into what's coming that's going to carry us through most of the rest of the book of Acts?
Yeah, we're going to start traveling.
We have a major plot shift happening here. And so this has been going on. Peter is, it just says in the end of the last session, you can go back to it, but that Peter departed for another place. And so we don't know where Peter went, but he got out of town.
Yeah.
And
he'll meet up with Paul a little bit later,
yeah,
but not in the book of Acts.
He's around, but he's stepping out of our narrative.
He didn't go to another place like a euphemism for heaven.
No.
He's actually traveling. He's alive.
So so now it shifts to Herod, because this is the Herod that was persecuting the church, and we got to figure out what's going to happen with Herod, because again, he found out that he gained some popularity by beheading James the apostle. And so he arrested Peter, because all of a sudden this is a thing. So now we've got a new uptick in persecution in and around Jerusalem. Again, remember we had the early one. Everybody ran to other places, which spread the gospel to Asia Minor, Samaria, all over the place around that part of the world. But then things settled down in Jerusalem, and now things are coming back up in Jerusalem. Yeah. And so we got to figure out, so what are we going to do with Herod? So it gives us a little bit of thing here in the end of verse 19. It says, "Then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there." Hold it.
Why?
Weren't we just talking about Caesarea the other day? Just a couple of sessions ago. We met Cornelius
in Caesarea,
a Roman centurion who lived in Caesarea.
Yeah.
And Peter went to Caesarea to connect with Cornelius. If we're not going to redo the whole thing.
No.
If you missed it, go back a few sessions. Go back a few sessions and get it. But he's in Caesarea. Now,
do you think he's chasing Peter?
I don't think so. He went there because it says there was some dispute with the people of the area.
Oh, yeah, he was fighting with the people of Tyre and Sidon.
Yes, and so while he was having trouble with them, he went to make an appearance and to have meetings and do all those things that government officials do. And remember that Herod is a king. We got to discuss our hierarchy here and things. Herod is a king. He's a Jewish king, but he's also a puppet king, because he's a king because the Romans, who actually, this is part of the Roman Empire, the Romans are overseeing this whole thing. Herod is a king because the Romans said he was a king, and his job is not to actually rule the country. The Romans are doing that. We had in Jesus' death, we had Pilate. They've got a Roman governor there. They've got Roman forces there that are actually running everything. They're pulling the strings. But they have a Roman king or a Jewish king in place to keep the people settled and to help them understand issues of local custom, local law, local religion, which is why Herod is interested in persecuting the Christians, because they're not part of the local Jewish religion.
Yes.
And so you've got all those things. So Herod is doing that, the political thing. He's a political guy. He's a go-between between the people and the Romans. He doesn't actually have any real political power, but he's a very good figurehead, and the people see him as their king. So he goes to Caesarea. Now, here's another weird thing to think about. Now, a couple of chapters ago, we met a rather prominent Roman centurion. He's a commander of at least 100 men. It said in there when we talked about Cornelius, it talked about that he is from the Italian regiment. They brought this Roman soldier, this commander, all the way from Italy. He's the real deal.
Yeah.
So it doesn't tell us. What do you suppose the chances are that when the Jewish king, who's being overseen by the Romans, travels to Caesarea, which is Cornelius's hometown, what do you bet Corny and his men are part of this security detail, and they're here? I'm guessing that's almost a slam dunk.
Yeah.
He's one of the high-ranking military officials. I'm guessing he's there as part of this security detail and part of this thing that's going on in Caesarea. So Herod goes, and they sort out some stuff, and it gives us a little bit of details there that really isn't important for what we're going on. But he does a big public appearance. And it says that, verse 21, on the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. You want to kick?
So we're going to go outside of the Bible for a little minute.
Yeah.
And again, when we study the Bible, I mean, yes, we read the words and we trust God to give us a new understanding, and sometimes there's a new revelation, but also we have to go out sometimes and find out what is actually going on here, because these are real living people, and there are histories. There are stories that were passed down and then written down.
We have to recognize that the Bible is not primarily a historical document.
No,
it's not. It's not, and by that I mean not that it didn't happen in history, but the purpose of the Bible is not to give us a blow-by-blow events of the day's events like a newspaper might, or a history. It's not a recording of history. It's a recording of God interacting with his people throughout time. And so we're following the stories of lives, but we're not getting the day by day, the whole picture.
Even the whole picture sometimes, like who were the centurions and why did they come and what was happening in around there. And
but there are ancient documents and people that were doing that, and their documents still are with us today as well. And we can refer to those to bring light to this.
And I know that on the last podcast, I threw out the term early church father. So we have, back in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, we have what we refer to as the early church fathers. They were close enough to the events that they were getting, either they'd seen it or they were getting 1st or 2nd or only 3rd hand account. They weren't like us. Yeah. If we were hearing the story passed down now, we're so far away, there'd be so many errors.
For example, probably none of us remember the events of World War II.
Yeah.
However, it's not too hard to talk to, well, I remember my grandpa talking about this. And you can find somebody that was there that you know, and they could tell you what happened on this event. Some of these people, not only do we have people that were there, we'll get to in just a second, but we also have people in some of the early church historians and people that said, oh yeah, that their grandparents must have been there. They had an aunt or an uncle or that old person that they used to know in their neighborhood or in their church that says, I remember when Paul came to preach at our town. And, and you could get a close firsthand account.
So we also use the ancient writings.
Yes.
And there were people there were historians of the time. There were biographers. There were people that were writing the accounts. One of those that we use for a lot of New Testament is a man named Josephus. And Josephus is one of those people that he was at a lot of things. He saw a lot of things. And politely enough, he wrote it. Or if he did,
it was his job. What we know about Josephus is he was a Jew
who was a scribe.
He was a scribe. He was a writer. He was in our day we would refer to it as a news reporter of some kind. He was a historian, and his job, he was paid by the Roman government to document what was going on in Jerusalem and send it back to the Roman leadership that could review what's happening, because remember, they're the ones that are actually running all of this.
So it wasn't really a news reporter that was reporting to the people. He was more like the guy that was making the report that we send back.
Yeah.
So he was also...
He's a government historian.
And he's going to be pretty accurate.
Yeah.
He's not going to be embellishing for the nightly news. He's actually, this is what happened. And he doesn't put a lot of his opinion in his stuff.
And again, and also, he's not involved directly in some of these events. So, he's not a Christian.
No.
He's not he's not politically involved in any of this, as they would say. He doesn't have a dog in this fight. No, he's an outside, he's an observer writing down what's happening.
Unbiased.
Well, at least in theory. I mean, you never know.
Everybody
has a bias, but he doesn't have a political angle he's working. He's simply recording the events of history and putting them back. And you can get on your phone or your computer or whatever it is, and you can look up the works of Josephus, the documents of Josephus, and he records different events. And he records this day, and he's there.
He was here.
And he gives this account is only a paragraph. Josephus writes a couple of pages about this event and this day.
So it was a crazy thing that was going on. It looks like, it really is just a short little 4 verses and, 4 inches in my Bible. But one of the things that was interesting was he describes Herod's clothes. And it says, so Luke, a doctor and a man, says, he was wearing his royal robes, and he sat on his throne, and he delivered a public address, a speech to the people. So Herod's royal robe of the day.
According to Josephus.
Now, we're picturing the long velvet cape of the British monarchy, or
I'm thinking
of the Caesars.
I'm thinking of a Roman toga, white thing with the little sash on,
Yeah, he's all fancied up for the day, but not. No, this guy is wearing silver, like a silver suit. And it could have been like a silver chainmail suit.
Yeah, Josephus mentions something almost like a scale armor, and it was polished aluminum. Polished silver. Yeah, polished silver. So it's the closest thing they had to chrome in the day. It shines.
I'm surprised he wasn't like melting in there.
And we don't know. And Josephus records that he was his royal,
such
his
an ego.
throne, his thing, he would be in a spot where the sunshine shone on him. And Josephus kind of describes this scene that reminds me a lot of what would happen if you, in practicality, Herod is almost wearing a disco ball. He's got these plates of polished almost mirror-like silver. I don't know why I want to start saying aluminum, but this polished silver around. He's sitting in the sun and it's shining all over. You would almost be too much to look at. And that's when he's giving this address, according to Josephus in his account.
He's bright, he's shiny, he's glowing.
And as he does this, the people shout out. They say, "This is the voice of a God and not of a man."
Yeah. And that is not a good thing to ever say.
And
you should never be taking the place of God.
Never put yourself in a position where you try to compete or outshine God.
You cannot.
And the end result of it is, it says, and immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God. He didn't. We see that sometimes. Now, when Peter reached Cornelius's house, they fell down, and Peter says, "Hold it, no, I'm just a guy.
Yeah.
I'm just a guy like you." Herod doesn't do that. Oh, this is the words of a God, and Herod kind of takes a deep breath and smiles
and realizing
kind of likes it.
Now, he wasn't a pagan.
No,
he wasn't Roman. He was a Jew. He knew better.
He knew what that meant.
He knew who God was. His people were God's people. He had undoubtedly been raised knowing that who Yahweh was.
Yes.
I am the God that did the 10 Commandments, the God that brought his people out of
We remember
slavery
just a
and
little
out of
while
Egypt.
back, I mean, that was the charge that was leveled against Jesus.
Yeah.
Was that he claimed to be God.
Yeah,
and they crucified him for
this
it.
guy's grandfather had his uncle, because he's a nephew of Antipas. His uncle had crucified Jesus for this very crime, for claiming to be God. And now he's sitting there in all of his silvery, glittery, glowy, disco ball-y splendor, soaking up the praises of the people.
And it says, since he did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down. Okay, it's going to get weird here, folks.
This is great. This is
and
the best.
he was eaten by worms and died. Now, we're not going to go into details here.
Oh, I want to go into details.
Remember, we just had this account as a couple of 3 sentences. Josephus gives this.
He actually tells you
all
about the worms.
And he describes this thing. If you do a little research, you discover
it was a 5-day death.
The
worms didn't kill him instantly.
It actually is a medical condition. This does happen. And Josephus goes into all of the beautiful, gory details of how this goes. We're not going to do that on our podcast because you are probably listening.
We don't know who's listening.
And we don't know if you're on your way to lunch or home from it while we're doing this.
Don't Google while driving, but when you get stopped, look it up.
So the end of the story, the short piece of this as we wind down, is Herod out. Herod's gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Herod's fight against God ended poorly for him.
And we don't hear about him anymore because, he's done.
Dead and eaten by worms.
It's at verse 24. It says, but the word of God continued to spread and to flourish. And
of course
so
it did, because
everything went on.
God.
So Herod, who created this violence against the church, and the church prayed, not only is Peter safe from jail, the person who is persecuting them is eventually removed. And in short order. Does that always happen? No, but in this case it does. And then we have, as we finish up, we have one quick piece of business to wrap up before we launch into our next chapter and our next plot progression. And that is that while this was going on, remember we had Saul and Barnabas that had traveled from Antioch to Jerusalem to help with resources and money for the famine that was happening there. Okay, so they're in town in the Jerusalem area while this is going on. So in verse 25, it says, when Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they brought the resources to Jerusalem to help the church. They returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. And that takes us through the end of chapter 12. So again, we have a mention of John Mark. Sometimes he's mentioned as John, sometimes he's mentioned as Mark, often combined. We got him at the beginning of the chapter because remember when Peter got rescued out of jail, broke out of jail, they went to the house of Mary, his mother, and they mentioned John Mark. So here we have the introduction to John Mark, who we will follow more through the book of Acts and elsewhere in the New Testament. But here we have Barnabas and Saul traveling back to Antioch, and they have with them in tow John Mark, who we also learn in Colossians 4, I think was where I looked at it, that John Mark is a nephew to Barnabas. And so
they're related.
So they're related. So they go back, and that sets the scene for our next plot. And so I think that takes us out of this week.
Yeah.
Tune in next time because we have a whole new plot thread coming out.
Yep.
And so anyway, Father, thank you. Thank you for hearing the prayers of your church, and that when people pray, you move. It may not be the exact direction we think. You don't always do things the way that we would like or that we see, but you always find the solution that works. And we thank you for saving your church then. And we thank you that even today, you are answering the prayers of those people from around the world that are seeking you in hope and prayers of protection and mercy for the things that are happening in their lives, and that you are answering those prayers. Thanks, Father. Amen.
Amen. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Until then.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're interested in checking out more of our podcasts as they come available, please download our app in your device's app store or check us out on your podcast platform at Garden Valley Church. We look forward to seeing you next time.